Hey guys, Ryan Fowler from the FoxSports.com Fantasy Department with my top 5 fantasy running backs for the 2013 season. Begin at the top, number 1, and I don't think it's any surprise here. Adrian Peterson tops the list of all fantasy players heading into the 2013 season. He came back last year after that monster knee injury in 2011, ACL, tearing knees, huge recovery, epic proportions. Rushes for 2,097 yards, 12 touchdowns, 6 yards per rush. I mean, these numbers are silly. Averaged 21 to 22 carries per game, and he outscored the second highest scoring fantasy running back, Doug Martin, by 40 points. Also chipped in 217 receiving yards with a touchdown. Now, Christian Ponder's behind center. This is Adrian Peterson's offense, so I think Ponder's too big of a question mark to worry about Greg Jennings becoming some type of an impact player, taking touches and looks away from ADP. It's his game, and we're just playing in it. ADP top guy off the board in 2013. Second fantasy running back to come off the board, Doug Martin. Averaged 16.4 fantasy points per game. You remember that breakout game against Oakland last year? Rushed for 1,454 yards, 4.6 average per rush, 11 touchdowns, 5 games with 95 yards or more on the ground, and then he chipped in 472 receiving yards. This guy, again, Ray Rice reincarnated, even though Ray Rice is still playing. Doug Martin, nobody behind him, no threat. It's up to Josh Freeman, Mike Williams, and Vincent Jackson to kind of continue to move the chains to keep Martin on the field for him to reach his full potential in fantasy circles. Number 3 on my board, Arian Foster, and he only gets knocked down to number 3 because I think age is starting to catch up with him. The workload in Houston is starting to catch up with him, and I think one little hamstring or a calf strain could turn into a longer thing with Ben Tate behind him. There's little worry there in Houston that, hey, we can put in Ben Tate and not rush Arian Foster back. That's why he gets knocked down to number 3. 351 carries last year for over 1,400 yards. 15 touchdowns, did lead all fantasy running backs. Average over 16 fantasy points per game. We know Arian Foster is good. It's just a matter of, is the workload starting to become too much? I still like Foster to come off the board 3rd. 4th running back, Marshawn Lynch. Average over 15 fantasy points per game. 4th amongst running backs. Good news, back-to-back double-digit TD seasons. Had 11 and 12 over the last 2 years, respectively. 300 or so carries on average. The bad news, Russell Wilson, we saw what he can do with his feet. They bring in Percy Harvin. That creates some job security issues, not as a running back, but more touches and looks for Marshawn Lynch. But the good news, as we flip-flop back, yeah, there's some others in the mix now to move the chains, so it's not on Marshawn Lynch all the time. Marshawn Lynch comes off the board 4th on my board. And then finally, to round out the top 5 fantasy running backs, Ray Rice, we mentioned him before, took a step back from 2012, still rushed for over 1,100 yards, had 478 receiving yards and 10 total touchdowns. It was kind of the Joe Flacco show down the stretch there, and a lot of people forgot about Ray Rice. Then we looked at Bernard Pierce in the playoffs, had that nice game against the Colts at the end of the season. So it's not that Ray Rice isn't going to be a top 5 running back. It's just, how does this offense evolve with Joe Flacco signing that major contract? They lose Anquan Boldin, but they do have Dennis Pitta. They do have Torrey Smith. Ray Rice is going to be involved. Don't overlook him. Don't worry about it. 13.8 fantasy points per game, 6th in the league last year. Ray Rice, still a top 5 fantasy running back. FoxSports.com fantasy football registration is open and ready for you. Visit FoxSports.com/fantasy/football to sign up for a team and join a league today. Until next time, I'm Ryan Fowler for FoxSports.com.